Mount WARIO is a really fun course to play on 200cc, provided you can make it past the first 10 or so seconds. You'd think that 200cc would make some portions of the track, in particular the tree section, a lot more difficult. However, paradoxically, because you're going so fast, the amount of ways in which you can actually play the track is cut down quite a bit, which actually ends up making it a lot more straightforward. I mean, of course, I am a 200cc speedrunner that has an in-game nitro track time that's 6th best in the world, so take that with a grain of salt. Anyways, what was I saying again? Oh yeah! Welcome to part 60 of Basic Training, where we're going to cover everything you need to know about Mount WARIO on 200cc. As always, we're going to cover the recommended builds, mushroom strats, coin lines, and other advanced tips and tricks to help you start mastering the course. This tutorial is going to be broken down into 3 parts. In part 1, I'm going to go over a basic version of the run that won't include any advanced strategies whatsoever, and is designed to be widely reproducible so that you can easily conquer the staff coast. In part 2, I'm going to go over the strategies that I use in my current personal best, and in part 3, I'll cover the world record strategies. To help put all the different strats in context, I'm also going to be including full replays in each part of the tutorial. Before we get into the video, just want to say that if you've been enjoying my tutorials, it'd be a huge help if you could like the video and leave a comment. This type of thing not only lets me know that you're enjoying the content, but also lets YouTube know to recommend these videos to other racers who might be looking for tips and tricks on how to improve. I also release a new video every week, so if you want to stay up to date with my latest content, consider becoming a subscriber and hitting the notification bell beside it so that you don't miss out on any of my tutorials. With all that out of the way, let's get into the video. As per usual with 200cc, if you're just starting out, I recommend using Yoshi, Bitty Buggy, Azure Rollers, and Paper Glider. This is a good all-around starting build for 200cc that's going to give you quite a bit of control without sacrificing too much speed. Ultimately though, the build that you're going to want to use once you've gotten a decent handle on this course is WARIO, Wild Wiggler, Azure Rollers, and Paper Glider. Most of the mini-turbos in Mount WARIO are built up within the first 20 or so seconds of the track, and the rest is made up of mostly long straightaways. In my PB, you'll see that I use Dry Bowser instead of WARIO. They're actually the same stat-wise, but Dry Bowser in my opinion just looks cooler. The problem is that Dry Bowser has a character model that's quite a bit larger than WARIO, which actually does have the drawback of making the tree section quite a bit more difficult to navigate for reasons that we'll get into later. But that's all you need to know about the build, so let's check out the track. We're going to start off the run by holding down the item button so that as soon as we start moving, we'll use our first mushroom. This allows us to get up to top speed as quickly as possible, which is helpful because Mount WARIO doesn't have a lot of other places where we can actually use our mushrooms to save time. Now the most difficult portion of the run is going to be the first 10 or so seconds of the track, especially when we get to the level 2 run. The reason is that we have this series of alternating left and right turns, and the track where this occurs is really narrow, making it easy to hit the off-road or else falling off entirely. Not only that, but we really need to try and grab all 3 of the coins from the first right turn, because there's basically no coins for most of section 2, and if we don't get maxed out early, it's going to cost us a lot of time in the long run. So how do we actually navigate this first 10 or so seconds of the track? Well, I recommend just driving straight when the run begins, and then after tricking off the ramp, keep holding down the trick button and right on the joystick so that as soon as you land, you'll be in a right drift. Driving straight off the ramp at the start will give us enough time to build up a mini turbo, release and start a left drift, and set up our line properly to grab those 3 coins. Now after grabbing the 3rd coin, brake drift just a little bit if you need to, build up another mini turbo, and release. Immediately start your next right drift and hold left for just a little bit to widen your drift angle. After building up your mini turbo, release and trick off the ramp. Because I'm trying to keep things as simple as possible and minimize how much stuff you're doing on the controller, for this part what I suggest is that while you're in midair, keep holding down the drift button and right on the joystick so that as soon as you'll land, you'll start another right drift. Then just keep holding down right until you've built up a super mini turbo. Alternatively, you can brake drift a bit if you want to take this turn more tightly, but I wouldn't really mess around with optimizing this strat too much because when we get to my PB, we're going to do things totally differently. Now after releasing the super mini turbo, start a left drift once you get to this little straightaway, and build up a super mini turbo around the bend. Just after passing the elevated orange boost ramp, start a right drift and then hold left to widen your drift angle. The goal here is to try and angle yourself so that you go off this little snowy ramp here, since this is going to give you enough airtime to fully clear the gap, just like in 150cc. However, unlike 150cc, we're not going to release our drift until we've landed fully on the other side of the gap. Notice how my mini turbo boost doesn't actually come out until I've landed on the track. The reason for this is that if you keep holding down the drift button and right on the joystick while you're going over the gap, you'll keep charging levels of mini turbo in midair, and when you land, you'll actually have an ultra mini turbo built up. And now that we're on to section 2, we've more or less made it out of the woods. Except for, the woods that are in section 2. But you all know what I'm talking about. Section 1 is really tricky, and if you can make it out of here, you'll be more or less good to go from here on out. Start a right drift just after the start of section 2, release when you've built up a mini turbo, and then drive straight to grab the 4 coins. Then you want to trick off the ramp, and then drive straight up the track until you come to the glider section. This is another spot that's going to look pretty different when we get to my PB strats, but for now, what I suggest is to trick off the glider ramp and then just float down to the platform below the orange boost ramps. Trick off the edge of the platform and then keep holding down the drift button and right on the joystick so that you can start a right drift before getting to the orange boost ramp. The reason is that we don't actually want to trick off this ramp, otherwise we'll fly straight into the wall that's right in front of us. What we want to do is just keep holding down the drift button and left on the joystick to widen our drift angle, and once we're in midair, start holding right on the joystick so that we can build up a mini turbo as soon as we land. Then release and start a left drift off the stairs. Build up a super mini turbo and release when we get to the dam section, and then just try and hit as many of the orange boost pads as you can without going too far out of your way to do so. When you get to the end of the dam, trick off the ramp, and when you land, mushroom through the off-road to hit the glider. In my 150cc tutorial, I made a big deal out of how awful the tree section was. The reason for this is because on 150cc, you land far enough up the hill that you're pretty much forced to deal with the tree stumps that are in the road. And there's an optimal way to trick off all the stumps that's really annoying and inconsistent. But as you can see here, on 200, we're going super fast, and we can pretty much just fly over almost all the stumps. The exception here is the last 3 stumps before the turn, and while these can be annoying, there's a nice setup that you can use to avoid them pretty easily. Here's how it all looks in slow motion. Basically what you want to do is after going off the glider, do not move your joystick until you're past almost all the stumps. Then once you get to the first stump in this final set of 3, start holding up on the joystick so that you can land to the right of it. And when you land, try to be angled in such a way that you're moving toward this little gap in the final 2 tree stumps. And that's pretty much it. Now obviously this is going to be a lot easier said than done because when you're actually in a run, things are moving much more quickly as you can see here. But you can keep your eyes on that little gap more or less as soon as you go off the glider, and after you land, all you need to do is wait until you're just about to pass the final stump and then start a right drift. Like you can see here, it's not necessarily the end of the world if you clip part of the last stump, but you really want to try and avoid that if possible because if you hit it poorly, it can send you flying into a tree. Speaking of the trees, I don't have much advice for the rest of them, since for me anyways, they've never really posed too much of a problem. Honestly, as long as you don't get airtime from the last 3 stumps after the glider, avoiding the trees should be pretty straightforward. After that, we finish up section 2 and the rest of the track is more or less free. Start a left drift around the first turn of section 3, build up a mini turbo, and then release and trick off the ramp. You want to release your mini turbo just a little bit late so that when you go off the first ramp, you'll have enough speed to clear the second ramp. Then make your way down to the slalom portion of the track and start a left drift. Now for this drift, it's really important that you don't build up a mini turbo. The mini turbo-less drift here is what we call a slide, and the only reason that we do it is to get better alignment down the rest of the slalom by allowing us to take the next right turn really tight. So yeah, just start the left drift and hold it for maybe half a second or so and then release, and then start a right drift to build up a mini turbo. Follow it up with a left drift into mini turbo, and finally one more right drift into mini turbo, which you can see that I actually mess up here. Now watching the run here, it might look a lot easier than it actually is, but when you're first learning this slalom bit on 200cc, it can be really hard to do these turns properly. And if you're about to hit the wall, just hold down the brake button for a little bit, and that should be enough to correct your alignment around each turn. To finish up the run, all we need to do is 2 tricks off the moguls followed by a left drift into a mini turbo before the long downhill slope. Land slightly before you get to the final left turn and mushroom over the off-road to finish up the track. Now before we check out the full run, let's quickly recap the coin lines. Your first 3 coins will come from the start of the run. Coin 4 will come from the first ramp. You might grab some coins around this wide turn, but since my PB and the world record avoid this section entirely, I'm going to assume that you aren't grabbing any of these coins. So, coins 5, 6, 7, and 8 will come from the very start of section 2. Coin 9 will come from the end of the dam, and coin 10 will come from the middle stump just before landing in the glider section. This last one can be a little bit tricky to get though, so if you're missing any coins, you'll more than likely be able to grab them from the slalom bit. And that's it for the level 1 strats, so let's check out the run. Moving on to PB strats, there are a few major differences with a level 1 run. First up is the alternating turns at the start of the run. In level 1 we took a slightly wider line so that we could build up mini turbos more easily, but we had to brake drift so as not to go off the track. However, if your soft drifting is on point, you can actually do this entire section without brake drifting at all. Basically, the way that it works is that we do our left drift to grab the 3 coins just like before, but then we don't start our next right drift immediately. Instead, release and then wait until you're in line with the next right bend and then start the right drift. Definitely one of the trickier strats to learn the timing for in this run, but it's worth it to learn for sure. Next up is the ramp at the end of this section. In the level 1 run, we just tricked off of it, but this actually causes us to take a super wide line around the next turn. So what we want to do instead is release our mini turbo just before we get to the ramp and then start another right drift and then hold this drift while going off the ramp. If we keep holding the drift button and right on the joystick while in midair, this will allow us to take a much tighter line around the turn here and also build up a super mini turbo. Then when going off the ramp, we're going to start a left drift and again hold this drift off the ramp. This is going to allow us to build up an ultra mini turbo around the next hard left turn. Finally, for section 1, when we do the last drift into the shortcut, we actually want to take the turn as tightly as possible. You can make it over the gap without hitting the ramp at all, but you've got to approach the turn from a much wider angle, and it can be a bit tricky to hit it properly, but nothing too crazy. Moving on to section 2, the only real difference is at the very start. In level 1, we just built up a mini turbo and then drove straight through to grab the 4 coins. But what we actually want to do is build up a mini turbo and then after grabbing the second of these 4 coins, release, do 2 left hops, and trick off the ramp at the end, which allows us to cut off the long left turn before the glider ramp. Keep holding down the drift button and left on the joystick so that when you land, you'll immediately start a left drift. Next, we're going to build up a mini turbo and then trick off the glider ramp. However, instead of floating safely down like we did before, what we want to do here is aim towards the leftmost orange boost ramp and try and land on top of it. Tricking off the orange boost ramp in this way will give you the boost and keep your glider out. And then instead of landing far back on the next platform, we want to try and land just on the edge of it so that we can trick again and keep our glider out. There's a little wall bonk that I do here as well. All the recent world records that I've seen do something like this, and I think it does actually give you a little boost when done properly, but I'm not actually sure whether or not I'm doing it correctly here. Anyways, before we land from the glider, start holding down the drift button and right on the joystick so that when we land we'll be in a right drift, and then just like before, start holding left a bit to widen your drift angle when going off the ramp. Unlike before, we want to start holding right just after going off the ramp so that we can take this turn super tight. Then we'll build up a mini turbo, release, and hop over this little corner where there's no track. That's not just for the swag, by the way. Taking the turn in this way allows us to take the next turn a lot tighter than in level 1 run. After that, the rest of the run pretty much plays exactly like before, but the one thing that I do want to point out is the glider section. I made things a lot harder on myself than I needed to by picking Dry Bowser, because as you can see, the ghost covers pretty much the entire gap, which makes navigating this section a huge pain. But I guess that's the price that I have to pay for not staring at Wario's gigantic rear end for the entire run. Anyways, like I said, the rest of the run looks more or less identical to before, so let's check out a full replay of my current personal best. Finally, moving on to the world record strategies. Funny story here. I actually finished up an outline of the script about a week ago when the world record was more than 400 days old. The world record at the time looked really similar to what I did in my current personal best, and so what I was originally planning on doing was just saying that the world record looks like my PB and then playing the two runs side by side so that you can see how all the strats are really supposed to be executed. Then, friggin' Alberto comes along and beats the world record the day after I finished the outline using strats that are not super different, but different enough that not only was it worth mentioning, but also different enough that I needed to make an entirely new section of the video. Case in point, the mushroom strats. In my PB, I use my mushrooms at the very start of the run, then at the glider section, and once at the very end of the track. In contrast, Alberto uses his second mushroom to clear the gap, and then just takes the very last turn without a mushroom, similar to what you'd see in high-level shroomless time trials. The next notable difference is in the tree section, where the current world record takes a tighter line through the trees than I do. They then build up a super mini turbo around the turn at the start of section 3 before the ramp. The timing on this is really tight though, and if you don't do it properly, then you're more or less guaranteed to run into the wall. The final major difference is in the last glider section. The world record does some glider vectoring rather than just trick off the glider like I do. An additional innovation that Alberto's run uses over the previous world record is motion glider strategies, and if you don't know what I'm talking about, check out my Cheep Cheep Beach 150 video or my advanced strats video for more info on that. All things considered, it's a bit hard to say how much time Alberto's strats save in comparison to the previous world record, since at the time of finishing this script, he's ahead of the old record by 100 milliseconds, and from what I can tell, he's still widening the gap pretty considerably. But yeah, that's pretty much all the world record strats, so let's check out a full replay before closing out the video. And that's everything you need to know about Mount Wario on 200cc. You know, the one thing I haven't talked about much in these videos is just how dynamic of a game Mario Kart 8 actually is. A lot of people think that it's a pretty straightforward game with not very many in-depth mechanics, and when you compare it to games like Mario Kart DS, I guess I can understand where they're coming from, but new records in this game are being set almost every day it seems, and it can be pretty hard to keep up. Case in point, like I mentioned before, the day after I finished the outline for the script for this video, Alberto goes and posts a new world record, forcing me to redo a third of the damn tutorial. I mean, it sounds like I'm complaining, but in reality I think it's awesome how there's brand new innovations to this game that's been out for more than 4 years now, even longer if we're talking about Mario Kart 8's release on the Wii U. So yeah, long story short, I guess I'm trying to say that I feel like the game doesn't really get the credit that it deserves for being as interesting as it is. But anyways, that's going to be it for me for today, guys. Let me know down in the comments if and how much time you were able to save from the strats that I went over in this video, because I do really enjoy hearing how much these videos have helped you all out. Thank you very much for taking the time out of your day to do some basic training, and as always, I will see you in the next video.